In the 18th century, despite Europe's embrace of Enlightenment values, Jews still faced widespread prejudice. One man, renowned philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, set out to integrate the Jewish people into mainstream society and liberate them once and for all from the oppression of anti-Semitism. By the early 1700s, the Enlightenment movement had inspired European society with idealistic principles of reason, liberty, and tolerance. Still, for most of the 18th century, European Jews did not enjoy citizenship, were crippled by legal limitations, and could be expelled by nearly any local ruler. In Portugal, for instance, 139 Jews, mostly women, were burned at the stake. While some intellectuals argued that if Jews were freed from legal restrictions, they could successfully assimilate into society, writers like Voltaire held that Jews would always remain outside of mainstream culture because they are inherently corrupt. The ground was fertile for one budding Jewish philosopher to make his mark. In 1743, Moses Mendelssohn, a ritually observant Jewish-German 14-year-old, left his hometown of Dessau to advance his Talmudic studies. So poor that he had to travel by foot, Mendehlssohn made his way to Berlin, where he joined a Torah academy. There, he met Jews who were committed to both Torah and Enlightenment ideals, and Mendehlssohn was inspired to broaden his studies. Over the next decade, Mendehlssohn grew increasingly enamored by the depths of philosophy and literature, and, in 1755, co-launched the weekly Hebrew periodical Kohelet Musar, where he wrote articles outlining how Jews could encounter God through natural sciences in addition to Torah. When he won a prize for his essay on evidence in metaphysical sciences, besting the famous Immanuel Kant, the Prussian Academy of Sciences voted to make him a member. But King Friedrich the Great blocked the induction of a Jew. Still, Mendehlssohn was dubbed the German Socrates and became the unofficial leader of a growing circle of Enlightenment-minded Jews. In 1769, a theologian who dreamed of converting all Jews to Christianity took note of Mendehlssohn's work and challenged him to either publicly refute Christianity or accept it and convert. Mendehlssohn viewed debates on Judaism versus Christianity as medieval. He was acutely aware, based on his past precedent, that if he were to successfully refute Christianity, there could be violent attacks on Jews, or even expulsions. So, Mendehlssohn instead tried to deflect Lavater by explaining that Judaism's laws did not impose upon other faiths, but Lavater wouldn't let it go. Mendehlssohn wasn't willing to risk Jews' safety and declined to engage in further public debate with Lavater. Instead, he put his efforts towards reversing the anti-Semitism that was at the root of the debate. Since Mendehlssohn had personally won a privileged place amongst German intellectual society, he was convinced that all Jews could also win the respect of their neighbors if they learned how to integrate into mainstream culture. Mendehlssohn believed integration would eventually free European Jews from restrictive civil laws. His first step was to discourage the use of Yiddish, maintaining that it was a grammatically weak language that stunted intellectualism. Then, in 1774, he embarked on a translation of the Torah, designed to teach German through biblical study. Mendehlssohn also boldly argued for Jewish rights in the public sphere. In 1775, he successfully petitioned against the expulsion of Swiss German Jews. 2 years later, when needy Jews in Dresden, Germany were also facing expulsion, Mendehlssohn's petition saved them as well. By 1783, Jewish emancipation had become a popular topic of debate, and, in response, Mendehlssohn published his magnum opus, Jerusalem. His book promoted tolerance by differentiating between church and state, and demonstrating that Judaism's Torah-based laws were noble because they were founded solely upon reason and divine legislation. While this petition impressed Enlightenment philosophers like Immanuel Kant, Mendehlssohn's loyalty to Jewish laws was growing increasingly unpopular amongst other Enlightenment-minded Jews who, having adopted contemporary style, were increasingly gaining social acceptance. Over time, these Enlightenment-minded Jews became known as Maskilim, and they gradually disengaged from traditional Judaism. Mendehlssohn, however, stayed devoted to Torah law up until his death in 1786. By the 19th century, the Maskilim pulled further away from traditional Judaism, radically shifting synagogue services to include mixed-gender seating, organs, and sermons spoken in German. Eventually, traditional prayers longing for the return to the land of Israel and the coming of the Messiah were omitted, and new Jewish schools emphasized secular studies over Torah studies. And while the 19th century brought Western European Jews the legal emancipation Mendehlssohn sought, many Germans began to resent full-fledged Jewish integration into German society. Dozens of anti-Semitic pamphlets circulated through Germany in the first few decades of the 19th century. In the summer of 1819, the Hep riots shook German Jews with violent lootings and murders. As anti-Semitism persisted, many felt that their only ticket to social acceptance was through conversion. Of Mendelssohn's own 6 children, 4 converted to Christianity. Moses Mendelssohn's efforts to integrate Jews into mainstream culture brought Jews to the forefront of modern society. But unfortunately, the German anti-Semitism Mendelssohn thought he could eradicate continued to fester underground and eventually erupted full force into the tragedy of the Holocaust.